Great Falls, Montana. And I am also an American Indian Studies teacher here in Great Falls, Montana. So I teach at the high school level, and I have a teaching partner, and that's usually my tech girl. So this is where the day went awry, is I don't have my tech girl. My teaching partner, Miranda Murray, she is a Yankton Sioux descendant. She is also an IFA instructional coach at the elementary level. And what that means is we go into classrooms and we help educators infuse Indigenous content into their classroom and curriculums. We also provide a lot of professional training and development. What we have done as well is we're in charge of training our teachers. So we offer a lot of professional development in the evenings for our educators. And I just wanted to say thank you to the Office of Public Instruction for having, I might mess up and say us here, because I'm so used to having Miranda. But thank you for having me along. And also we have some additional resources available on the OPI website. So I was asked to do some work today with you all around the essential understandings. And so before we get started with the essential understandings, I just wanted to say that the 1972 Montana revision of its constitution stipulated that educators be using Indigenous content, be teaching about culture and the unique and distinct culture of our Montana natives. And so that's difficult to know where to begin, right? Because you just have this new constitutional mandate where it says this. And so educators didn't know really where to start. And so in 1999, the essential understandings were developed, and the essential understandings, so there was a convening of tribal leaders and community members that convened, and they came up with the 7 essential understandings. And how we describe the 7 essential understandings is really what teachers should be teaching, what students should be learning, and then what community members should come to know to be true about American Indian people. And how we use the 7 essential understandings in our district is I teach my high schoolers the 7 essential understandings directly, but you can also use it as a guiding practice. So when you're thinking of vetting materials and deciding whether it's good content to share with your students or maybe not so great content to share with your students, really looking to those 7 essential understandings to provide that guidance of, does this fit within the 7 essential understanding framework? So we'll get started with, next slide, please. Yep, so we have essential understanding 1, and something to keep in mind is that the 7 essential understandings are written at a very collegiate level. And I don't mean that we're not educated people, but they're just really multifaceted and multi-layered. Since the 7 essential understandings several years ago, the Office of Public Instruction's Indian Education Department has come out with some key concepts as well, just to further unpack the essential understandings. So just taking a look at essential understanding 1, and then, that might be difficult. We get questions like, okay, so how would I describe this, or how would I infuse this in a kindergarten classroom? And so the graphics that you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen is really a simplistic form. So when we are thinking of essential understanding 1, even though it's written at a collegiate level, when we think of essential understanding, really the summary of essential understanding is diversity among tribes. And how do we explain that to others? So at whatever grade level we're teaching, is that tribes are different. And oftentimes our text or how we've come to talk about American Indian people is lumping them all into one, kind of those blanket statements. So how do we explain differences? Tribes different in religion. To teach religion, tribes spoke different languages. Tribes lived in different locations, so they have different resources that affect their practices and traditions and beliefs and governments. Also, tribes have different locations and practice and practices. They have different histories, different homes, and different uses for things. So a blanket statement that I would think of that sometimes gets tossed around is Native Americans lived in teepees, which isn't not true, but not all American Indian people lived in teepees, right? It depends on your location and your access to resources, your geographical location and your climate. All right. So just a little, the next slide is an example of what I'm talking about. So taking a look at this phrase concerning the bear and its significance, if you could respond in the chat, you don't have to, but if you could respond in the chat, how might this text be problematic if we came upon it in one of our books? And throughout this presentation, I'm going to show you different text scenarios, and it's all texts that I have found on my own in some of the texts that we have within our district. So the bear has always carried much significance to Native American people. Why might this be potentially problematic? The bear has always carried much significance to Native American people. Why might this be? Yeah, so it's not recognizing differences in tribes. Always is definitely a blanket statement. In very real ways, certain tribes across what we now know as the United States may have never encountered a bear. Yeah, exactly. Great. Yep. And so this is just what I'm talking about. And sometimes we get questions too from educators like, okay, but what do I do because this is a textbook that I'm supposed to use? Sure. We understand that you can't gather up these textbooks and go throw them in the river, because you got to work sometimes with what you have. And so this could also be a teachable moment, like a pivot point, like, well, it says always, but bringing up exactly what we're bringing up in the chat. This might not be true because there's 574 federally recognized tribes, over 200 unrecognized tribes by the federal government. So that's a lot of tribes to be blanket stating this into. Exactly. Great. Thank you for interacting in the chat. All right. So let's take a look at the Essential Understanding 2. Yep. Essential Understanding 2 has a lot of overlap and similarities with Essential Understanding 1. And diversity among individuals. So how would we explain that to a kindergartner? People are different. Individuals differ in appearance, beliefs, locations, and experiences. There are no generic American Indians, just like there are no exact copies of anyone. And a lot of those differences that we find in Essential Understanding 1 that we just went over, similar to Essential Understanding 2 differences. I always tell my students, like, even if you have an identical twin, those two individuals aren't going to be the same. And so often our students' only experiences to American Indian people are those like black and white historical photos. The Office of Public Instruction for the past several years has put out a poster series called Making Montana Proud. And I know that Stephen was a big actor in that and really initiating that. And it's really great. Some, educators might be like, I teach music. I don't know how to explain diversity among individuals. Just thinking about how you set up your space or your room and using something like those posters and giving students the ability to see American Indian people in a contemporary way. Feathers aren't not true, but there's a certain time and place, and also not all American Indian people wore feathers, or I know that Northern Cheyenne women don't touch eagle feathers. So although it might be important to some tribes and some individuals, it's not necessarily important to everybody, right? Okay. Next slide, please. I really appreciate you guys helping with this and being my Vanna Whites here. So this is a scenario of some text that I found. So the Navajo Dene, and it's talking about their sandstone paintings. And so I will tell you that It's not up to everybody to know everything about everything, right? It's just important to know where to start. So I appreciate this text a little bit more. So say if you have no idea about Navajo or Dene, what makes this text better than the first text is that Dene is what the people call themselves. So that already is providing tribal specificity, right? And we might not know if this text is true or untrue, but at least we would know where to start digging for an answer. So a lot of tribes, I think in fact, most tribes have their own website. So you could go to the Navajo tribal website and start finding cultural information. At least you would know where to start looking instead of just saying, talking about sandstone paintings and blanket statementing that to all tribes. Why not put Dene first and Navajo in parentheses? I don't know. I am not the author of this text, but I think that at least it's recognizing. So when I introduce myself as Aani and Anishinaabe, that's for me. And then I say the government calls those tribes. Certainly there's always room for improvement in our text and in our information. I just appreciate that this text was tribally specific. And I think, I don't know, this is just me assuming, Navajo might be more recognizable to some folks. And so when they see Navajo, they know it's in relation to some type of cultural information. All right. So essential understanding 3. The thing about the essential understandings too is they're only going to get a little bit more text heavy, but that's okay. We will get through them together. So how we simplify essential understanding 3 is that culture is alive and well. And when I think about culture, I think I relate them to our environment, specifically trees. So when I think of culture, I think of trees. Culture is like a tree because there are parts you can see and parts that are less visible. Culture and trees are seasonal. You can see different things in different parts at different times. Culture and trees reproduce. There's a transfer of some things or all things. Culture and trees are resilient and can withstand. Culture and trees evolve and change over time. Culture and trees can be replenished. And when we're thinking about culture and providing information to our students, I would also like us to keep in mind that culture goes far beyond the powwows and regalia that are most visible. So like when you think of a tree, like you think of the leaves or the branches, things that stand out the most that you look at and you're like, tree. However, culture, it goes far beyond those visible, recognizable pieces that we've been trained to notice. So far beyond the powwows and regalia, we have things that, so we have things like smudging and ceremonies, harvests, games, songs, language, prayer, and much, much more. Culture is alive and well. We're not stuck in that freeze frame black and white photos, right? Providing contemporary culture to our students is very important as well. All right. So essential understanding 4 is with trees. The graphics crack me up. So there is the Montana map that is available on the Office of Public Instruction website. We think of essential understanding 4 and treaties and reservation land specifically. So what we now know as reservations wasn't always obviously the case, but when we think of reservations, I think of our home base, and the summary of essential understanding 4 is through treaties and other agreements between governments, reservation land, this is very important, reservation land is reserved by tribes for tribes. And how we explain that to others is I say you cannot give someone something that already belongs to them or was a place that they already occupied. And it's important to remember that although we have the reservation system now and we have had historical context molded by certain treaties, that Indigenous people were already living successfully on the area that we now know as the United States for millennia. And so the incorporation of tribal land or maps and how that's changed over time is important to our students. I always think about imagery in our rooms too, because I think about myself as a student, which probably isn't great, but I learned a lot about character because my English teachers had a lot of information about character on their posters. So when I wasn't quite listening to the class, I would take a look at what was going on around me on the walls. And I think that anytime that we can provide maps and locations, because those are the standards. And I think, Stephen and Mike did a really good job about talking about this in the last session, is that these are the standards that are already being taught in our, especially social studies classes. And so I do a lot of work in my American Indian Studies classes about the 7 reservations in Montana and having them identify them and name them, and also identify the tribes whose governments are located on those reservations. All right. Essential Understanding 5 deals with those federal policies. And so the summary of Essential Understanding 5 that we discuss is that many federal policies have been put into place that have affected American Indian people. How do we explain that to others? These policies or laws conflicted with each other and continually change, making it difficult for tribes and individuals. These policies or laws make American Indians the most regulated or controlled group in the history of the United States. And as we move through self-determination, tribes are able to become stronger nations. So just taking a look at that Essential Understanding 5 and acknowledging those different federal policy periods that still affect American Indian people today. So sometimes we get questions of, these federal policies, they're over. Why do we still reference them, or why are they still important? And I think that we need to kind of reframe how we view these federal policies. So on the next slide, historians are really good at doing that, compartmentalizing, like this chunk and this chunk and this chunk and this chunk. But what you're seeing on your screen is just a different frame of reference. So first of all, my teaching partner and I always like to acknowledge time immemorial and the sovereignty that was happening before. Something happened in 1492. I'm not sure what it is, but something significant happened in history in 1492. And so that's how historians compartmentalize history beginning. And that's not true. But I'll give you another example. So when you look at the timeline this way, you'll see that these federal policy periods, again, overlap each other and often conflict with each other. And the constant change, or the pulling out the rug, if you will, has made it difficult for tribes and individuals at times to really, that's a good point. Mikey said, who discovered who in 1492? Yeah, so even though these policies might be over, we see the effects of them still continually. So my example of the assimilation period in our historical timeline, although assimilation and specifically boarding schools, that policy period is over, I have students in my class whose grandparents are survivors of those boarding schools, or sometimes their parents are survivors of those boarding schools. And just because assimilation has ended doesn't mean that I don't see the effects of that assimilation policy every day in my student population. That policy is still affecting our students generationally today. And I see that in my classroom, and I see that reflected in my classroom. Even though that, a historian would say, oh, it's over, right? It's not over. I still see it in their social and emotional abilities today. All right. So essential understanding 6. It's weird. I'm a nerd. I think I'm a nerd because I have favorite essential understandings. My favorite essential understanding is essential understanding 6. And essential understanding 6, I think of it because 6 rhymes with conflicts. And so how I would summarize essential understanding 6 is that histories or the telling of history conflict based on who is telling the story or giving the account. So often non-Native people have been in the place of power or the position of power to write or report on the history or subject matter concerning American Indian people. And how I explain essential understanding 6 to others is you cannot get the full or accurate story if you are only hearing it from one side. You cannot get the full or accurate story if you are only hearing it from one side. And I think that's a good, so Mike made a joke, who discovered who in 1492? Yeah, that's exactly what essential understanding 6 is telling us. So we'll go to the next slide. So we're big Lewis and Clark people, obviously, in Montana, definitely so in Great Falls, and something that I learned that those cities or towns that are along the Missouri River in which Lewis and Clark traveled, a lot of times they'll have the interpretive center. So we have a huge interpretive center here in Great Falls, and it's really cool. And it's really, it's really neat. I'm not saying like it's awful, but really pushing that Lewis and Clark discoverers, explorers narrative. So taking a look at this text that you see on your screen, what might be problematic about this text, or maybe not completely accurate when considering this text? Right, so someone said the plants were new to them. The word discovery, yeah, and we see that a lot in reference with Columbus, right? Assuming that nobody had discovered these plants before. Yeah, we see that definitely, just reframing how we are presenting this information. Yes, exactly. And so I think about Dog's Bane, and Dog's Bane, it's a bush, but you can pull out the branches of the bush and start to tear them apart and make cordage out of it. However, Dog's Bane, when placed on your tongue, it's poisonous. You get violently ill. And it also, this is just free information. It doesn't matter how often you tell a middle schooler to not do that. One of them will probably do it. You get violently ill. And I promise you that before Lewis and Clark came along and were discovering these plants, someone else knew about these plants before them. In our books, it talks about the Ursus horribus, and that's the scientific name for grizzly bear. That's what Lewis and Clark named the grizzly bear, Ursus horribus. But I promise you, I promise, American Indian people knew about the grizzly bear before Lewis and Clark happened upon it, right? Yeah, or the plants did not exist before Lewis and Clark. And that's kind of with the Columbus deal, right? It's like Columbus discovered this new world. He didn't discover the new world. He discovered a continent that was new to him, new to Europeans. But he discovered this new world with these, American, whatever, people on it. And that kind of insinuates, similar to this plant situation, that American Indian people were just in freeze frame, like nothing was happening before 1492. And then Columbus came over, and then everybody started moving, and then all of these plants started growing, right? Because non-Native people happened upon them. So this would be a good conversation piece, because again, you can't gather up. Sometimes district issued books, but this would be a great conversation piece to have with students. So, okay, discovered plants that were new to them. Who do you think was living successfully with these plants for millennia? American Indian people, right? Okay. We're on the home stretch. Okay, so let's take a look at this text. And I don't mean it that I'm necessarily presenting not good text. What could we potentially appreciate about this text concerning Essential Understanding 6? So that perspective. What is included in this text that provides a more well-rounded perspective? Mistakenly. Acknowledging diverse peoples. Right. And so I love that it's providing Columbus's perspective or Europeans' perspective, whilst also providing a different narrative that is allowing to create a more well-rounded story. We never want we're not, the point of teaching is not to make our students think exactly like us. The point of teaching, especially in my social studies courses, is to provide a multitude of perspectives that's going to tell the story in a more well-rounded, more complete way, but also give our students the ability to critically analyze the text that they're consuming, right? That's going to be a lifelong skill for them, is to be able to look at things and question why this information might maybe not be true, but also what am I missing from the story, right? Or where could I go to find more information? That is going to be a lifelong skill that we want to provide our students, this ability to critically analyze text or information that they're consuming. Students now are extremely overwhelmed. I see it in my classroom, just going on Facebook or any other type of social media. People with agendas are really, really good at presenting information in terms like it's presented or formatted like a news article, right? And it doesn't have to be necessarily a credible news source that it's coming from, but that's how it's presented to them. And I want to provide them with the skills and ability to read information and critically analyze, okay, whose perspective is missing from this story? What narrative might be missing from the story? Where can I go to get more information? Right? Yeah. Okay, we're on the home stretch, gang. Essential Understanding 7. So what you are seeing are the 8 flags that represent our Montana tribe, 7 reservations, but 8 flags. The Little Shell Band of Chippewa do not have a reservation. They are located in Great Falls, Montana, but 7 essential. Essential Understanding 7. 7 to me sounds like sovereignty. That's how I remember it. 7 and sovereignty. The summary of Essential Understanding 7 is that sovereignty, or the ability to remain separate and independent, looks different for every tribe. It looks different for every tribe. Your ability to remain separate and independent looks different for every tribe. And how I explain this to others is a lot of federal policies or laws were put into place that harmed sovereignty. And it takes a while to establish a strong sovereign nation and depends on your location, your access to resources, and your individual relationships with the federal government. It's always important to acknowledge that before colonization, tribes exercised full sovereignty. Your ability to remain separate and independent looks different for every tribe. It's dependent on your location, your access to resources, and your relationship with the federal government. Look at those pretty flags. All right. We'll go to the next slide here. Yeah, and so these are just, I'm sorry if that didn't format correctly on my end, but just some quick checks. Also checking for pictures that are in our books. And again, not that the teepee is not true, but I always just say, for every teepee that you have up, you could also put a hogan or a cabin, right? Recognizing that not all tribes live in teepees. Obviously, because of our location here in Montana, and the references to Plains culture and Plains tribes, teepees are accurate, but that doesn't mean that that's the case for all tribes across the United States. And then the next slide is just remembering that relationship building comes first, especially with our Indigenous students. We can't expect that our Native students were born with this inherent knowledge because of the federal policies that have been put into place. A lot of our Indigenous students haven't had access to this information themselves. So really familiarizing yourself with the student, not putting our students on the spot. I know that that happens a lot of times with really, really good intentions, but so take Great Falls for an example, and you are presenting content in your classroom. I know that teachers with the best of intentions say, well, so how do you as a Native American feel about this? And the student might not know, because this might be their first time that they're experiencing this information. So really just putting those relationships, those connections first, and allowing the students, maybe having a side conversation, allowing those students to be comfortable in sharing what they would like to share, but not assuming that, all American Indian people just woke up and knew this information. The assimilation policy was very, very effective in making sure that we don't, right? Okay, and then this is just our information. Again, I'd want to give a shout out to my teaching partner, Miranda Murray, but if you have more questions for us, or you want to go to our website, this is our website. We co-facilitate an educational consulting group together. It's called Bright Trail Education. And so this is just where you can go to find more information. I would also definitely encourage everyone to visit the Office of Public Instruction's website. Underneath that Indian education page, there is really great information that is specific to grade levels and content areas, which is always helpful. Yep, and then we can stop screen sharing too and ask questions, hang out, whatever. I appreciate your guys' time. I appreciate you all being like, you know what? It's the weekend, but I'm still going to do school stuff. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So any questions for Jordann? Jordann, thanks so much for sharing that.
Yeah, I apologize. Like I got nervous because of the time thing. So I started whipping through, and then I was like, hang on,
You
take a breath.
Tell them about the group you work with, Everyday Native.
Oh yeah. So the other good, Mikey, good call. I should tell the people about the things that I'm involved with that are helpful information myself. So everydaynative.com is a free resource to teachers grades 4 through 12. I'm sure that I know that you can definitely diversify how you present it to reach maybe even 3rd or 2nd grade, but Everyday Native is a resource that is free for teachers, and it is a whole entire website that you just sign up for. You create an account, and that's just to see, we don't stalk you or anything. It's just to see how many teachers we have engaged. But we have teachers engaged in the Everyday Native site through all 50 states. And there is primary source documents, photographs, poems that are provided. There's also video resources with discussion questions. And what I appreciate about the video series, I think like a lot of educators, is, when it's just kind of movie day These aren't full films, but they're short films that come with discussion questions. The films do the work for you. If you don't know where to start, or you don't feel like you have the language, Everyday Natives content and material has been vetted through a multitude of sources, so educators and also Indigenous content specialists. So Mikey is one of our vetters and our suggesters, if you will. Everydaynative.com is a really great resource. And then I am the writer for the short films for our new video series, Walking Together. And several of our films, Walking Together, have gotten national awards for the infusion of cultural content in our films. Thanks, Mike.
Oh, yeah. And then you mentioned films too. Another really cool resource that I get to work with is a group called the Big Sky Film Institute. They're based out of Missoula, but they have what's called the Native Filmmaker Club. And we premiere, Native American made documentaries about different kinds of topics. And last year our theme was sports. But this year we're going to feature a film featuring some Salish folks, one about a Cree Chippewa artist, Jonathan Thunder. He's a really amazing Indigenous artist. And then another one about a young kid down in the Amazon. And so, just another way to bring in Indigenous perspectives is through media. And so that resource,
Certainly.
Everyday Native, check it out. But that other group, Big Sky Film Festival, Film Institute, we'll be putting some information about that out on our website. But just another, 5,000 students, I think, saw those films last year, which is so cool. So check
Yeah,
out Everyday
and
Native.
I think too, even if you don't know where to start, having other folks, like they're really good guidance on language and being intentional with our language. So if you don't know where to start, you can just show them the film. Or if you want to find out more information for yourself, any of those resources are really great to begin or even expand your own language. I get asked a lot, what's the educators, again, they feel like they're going to say something wrong, or they're going to do something wrong, or they're going to teach something wrong. Oh, thank you, Peggy. And I always say the worst thing that you can do is nothing. The worst thing that you can do is nothing, because in my K through 12 experience, so IFA began receiving funding in 2005. That's when the funding legislation went through. Well, I graduated in 2006. And so even just from my own experience, growing up in Great Falls, Montana, it's so funny, we call that urban, like, so reservation and then urban, but like, how urban can you get in Montana? And so I grew up in a place that's considered urban. And I went to college, and that was the first time that I learned the extensiveness of boarding schools. And college shouldn't be the first time that students are hearing this information. Our students shouldn't have to pay to hear history in its entirety or accurate history, right? The other thing about most districts, certainly our district, is that our goals for our students is getting them college and career ready. So if we are wanting to get our students college and career ready, college can't be the first time that they're hearing this information, right? Because they're already going to be back here. That can't be the first time. If we want our students college ready, we need to be infusing IFA. All Montana university systems and most university systems across the United States require an American Indian Studies course of some kind to fulfill graduation. And then say our students aren't going to college. If we want them to be career ready, that means that in your career, you are going to be working with diverse individuals from all walks of life. We need our students to be able to understand diversity and perspective, which means that we need to be doing this. Urban isn't a type of Indian, it's an experience, one that many Native people have had. Is that from there?
Yeah, I don't
Mike?
know if it's from there, but I stole that from a group in Seattle.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But yeah, no, that book there, that's powerful.
Yeah. And again, feel free to, I know that I'm going to put gmail.com, because the other thing too, I get it. It's intimidating sometimes to ask questions in front of people. And that's totally understandable. So I just put my email in the chat, the Bright Trail email. And so if you think of a burning question or just a question that you weren't necessarily comfortable with asking, just shoot me an email. And I would be happy to answer it as best I could or provide more information concerning that question as well.
Hey, Jordann, before we end here, do you want to give like interesting experience you've had this year regarding Internet for All, a comment one of your students made or a parent or some kind of aha moment that kind of sticks out in your mind? And
Certainly. I thought you were setting me up for a joke. So I was trying to like figure out where you were going with this because I was going to be ready for it. Yeah. So actually in 2 weeks, God willing, I'm going to graduate with a master's degree in curriculum and instruction. And part of that process was I interviewed and I had our Native students at my school take a survey, which was basically, do you feel like IFA is making you more engaged in school? And then through engagement, obviously we have retention rates, right? Because if they're finding, especially, and again, though, IFA is for all, but I wanted to see how my Native students felt about this, if they really felt like it was making a difference. And almost 90% of them said they feel like IFA is, no, it was 96. IFA is making school engaging for them. And then as educators, we know what that means for retention rates. And that same, about 90% feel like IFA is helping them graduate high school. But the quote that I want to share that stuck out with me was one of my Native, because I interviewed and surveyed graduated students too. Like, do you feel like the infusion of IFA helped you graduate high school? And one of my Native graduated students, when I said, what advice would you give to educators or anyone wanting to implement IFA? And hers was more to the community. It wasn't necessarily to educators, but she said, believe it or not, it's 2023 and Native Americans aren't going anywhere.
nice. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much for having me. I apologize that was rapid fire information. I wish we could all be in a room together, hanging out and having fun, but I just really appreciate everybody's time, especially on a Saturday. Wow.
Yeah, thanks for all you do, Jordann.
Thank you all.
Yeah, and you've done some cool stuff and will continue to do so. So
thank you.
Maybe someday you'll be my boss here. That'd be cool.
I kind of get a feeling that maybe not anybody is your boss. In a good way, like you're trustworthy enough that they just know that you know what they're doing, but I don't know if anyone could keep up with you, Mikey.
That's funny. If anything, thanks for all your leadership.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Appreciate your time again on a Saturday.
Yeah, and with that, we're gonna take a break here. And don't forget to give us your feedback. We will come back at 12:30, and you'll hear from myself, Zach, and Stephen. Will dive deeper into some of those resources for PD and for grants and for just more of the how-to and some, the technical best practices for implementation. So thank you very much, and have a good lunch, and we will see you back here at 12:30. And thank you again, Jordann.
Thank you all.
Hey, Jordann.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
It was great interaction in the chat. I appreciate that.
You bet. So, all right.
All right.
See you when I see you.
All right. Sounds good, Mikey. Take care.
Right.
Where's your home girl, Jordann?
My associate.
Yeah.
She had another conflict today.
I see. I was just wondering.
Yep, I'll tell her that you guys gave her your regards.
Yeah, and Mike, I think you're still recording. Or if Jordan, if you could stop the recording.
Um,
I'm not able to.
I don't see that it's recording on my side.
There's recording on my end.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.